Good morning, everybody. This is Steve Wright. I'm the State Director for the ICT uh, sector team. And this is our weekly ICT educator webinar series. Our group has 10 regional directors, a support team, which includes Nicole Sherman, who's the producer of this series. And on our website, we have numerous resources for all of you, including prior webinars, completely recorded, chapterized in the video context, also transcribed, and all the materials associated with it, which is very useful if you want to do grants, use them in class, some remote learning, which is increasingly important. And coming up in the near future, we're going to have, next Friday, we're going to have Humanizing Remote Instruction. Dr. Pakinski-Brock, who's with the @ONE effort out of the Chancellor's Office, will be talking about how to make remote instruction more human. And I think, I'm just guessing that the goal of that is retention and engagement of the students, a better quality experience, which could become very important. And then in the coming weeks, a virtual labs update, and we'll be looking at our business information worker cross-disciplinary certifications again, which should be exciting. This week, we've got the pleasure of Karen Beltramo. Karen has been working with our team in ICT for some time now. Karen, before you were with West Ed, I think you were independent. You worked with the COE a lot and that group. But what I found, in addition to your diligence and your understanding of all these systems, I can't even remember the alphabet soup of systems that you know about, but dealing with information communications technologies is a little challenging because it's more of a horizontal sector, not a vertical sector. So diagnosing the right occupations and skills and top codes is really a crossword puzzle in a way. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, switch it over to Karen. I know there's a few slides in there I'll be helping on, and go to full screen here. There. You're on your own.
Oh, okay, I'll pass the next slide to you, Steve. I'll just introduce myself. Yes, I'm Karen Beltramo. I do work with West Ed right now as a senior project manager, and I oversee the development. My main role is oversee the development of all the dashboards on the launch board, which is hosted on CalPass Plus. And then, Steve, do you want to introduce our?
Yeah, I was recently given a job of talking to the Board of Governors about what we did. And I was just really struggling. But that's when I came up with this slide, and particularly the images at the top showing the desktop computer, the networking, and I began to realize for the first time that this mess of skill sets and pathways that we have in information communications technologies has a grouping that's kind of behind the screen. Those things that people do in support of the network, like computer science, IT, cybersecurity, and things we're calling now tech forest, which is everything from data analysts to cloud computing, a lot of things that are real techy in nature. And then there's the screen in front of you, and things that we're calling in front of the screen are things that we might call applications, user applications. If you're using Microsoft Word or Outlook or digital media, maybe the Adobe. And most of these things have to do with the utilizing these applications for the purposes of communication, which is increasingly happening online. So we kind of use this as an arbitrary split between the two, because at some point in time, even though all these things are interesting pathways in themselves, most of them are horizontal. They involve other disciplines, and it's very difficult. But still, we have to come up with something. So each one of these has its unique skill requirements, unique pathways. We need to make sense of it. So the first thing we do when we want to make sense of it, because there's too much for us to do with all of this stuff, what's the most important stuff to do? What's the stuff that's really going to give us the most bang for the buck? Where is it we have resources that we didn't know we had resources? Where's there a demand that's unique, that just speaks to us? And where do the numbers, even if they're only 80% accurate, where do they tell us to go? So when I have questions like that, I go to Karen Beltramo. Okay, Karen.
Okay, great. Yeah, so this was really great in terms of organizing how we're looking at these subsectors, I think, and just why are we doing a subsector analysis? And we did do one a few years ago that sort of changed over time now that with this next refresh. So it is the largest sector in terms of the number of students in the California Community College system. And just like Steve said, it's basically not really an industry sector, but really a cluster of skills. And I know I'm probably not saying anything that most people on this call don't know already. And so an ICT-DM is especially problematic in terms of the top codes that are assigned to the programs. There's many courses coded to top codes are actually outside of the sector for BIW and entertainment. And there's similar courses are coded to different top codes. All the time we'll see very similar courses. Excel, like a course in Excel, could be on a top code that's actually mapped to something that would be considered part of actually both C sector, but one that would be business and one that's more IT. And then when was a new top code created? So we know in our system in California, we do not use the classification of instructional programs like the rest of the nation does. California Community College is very unique in our top code system. And so we struggle with that. And part of that is because of this idea that we're using these top codes, and it's very imperfect to just look at top codes. Okay, let's see. I don't know why my screen's not going.
By the way, Allison is asking, could you explain what a top code is?
Yeah, so a top code is a taxonomy of programs. It's there. So just like any hierarchical classification, you can look at top codes on a 2-digit, a 4-digit, or 6-digit. So you're getting more and more granular. At the 2-digit level, you're at a really high level. Something like 07 will be called something like computer science, information technology. 05 is called business. And then you just start drilling down to the 04 level, 06 level. And get real fine. We have a real mess in our system. There's another whole classification of programs for instruction that the rest of the country uses. It's called the Classification of Instructional Programs, or SIPs. So when anybody comes from outside our state, or even from the CSU and UC, and they come into community colleges and they're like, top codes, right? What the heck? But what is that top codes were created before SIP codes. So California, we are probably, besides some of the institutions, some of the post-secondary in China, we are the largest system of post-secondary training. And so we had to develop top codes basically before. I just learned this a couple of years ago. So SIP codes came after. Our problem is that top codes is not being updated. That's a huge issue for us. And I don't know why I'm not able to advance. I'm sorry, I don't know what's, let me go try this. There we go. Looks like my keyboard is a little bit weird. But okay, so first of all, how did we do the community college sub-sector supply that got us to those 6 sub-sectors that Steve showed in that first slide? And so first of all, IT networking. So this was a kind of a combination of top codes and course titles that we used. IT networking was defined by Cisco networking, IT model curriculum courses. Computer science was very straightforward. That was defined by only courses that are on our computer science transfer top code. That is not even a CTE top code. That is not even mapped to Steve's sector. So this tells you kind of the world we're in and the craziness of how you try to make sense of things, okay?
If I may, because there are always critics who are going to say, why are you looking at a non-CTE grouping in your largely CTE effort? And anytime we do the labor management or labor market information for this sector, 80% of the jobs come up requiring a bachelor's degree in the tech side in particular. And when you look at that, almost all of those bachelor degree requirements could be satisfied by a computer science degree. And we do have an amazingly sophisticated computer science transfer pathway. May not the best, you know, but it's still unique. And so we just thought it would be irresponsible for us to leave that out, because a huge portion of our students would really get value from it. So we always want to include it in the dialogue, even though it's not CTE.
Well, and I have to tell you, Steve, years and years and years ago, there was an effort to try to make it a CTE top code. We have this weird idea in our system that I still see, I'll still review old slides that think that CTE is not transfer. And so that was the reason, is that the original thinking of CTE, that's not transfer. So this top code that's a transfer top code was not created as a CTE. So it's a fact that, once again, this top code system is just really not ideal, but it's what we got to work with right now. This new subsector that came up with this refresh is this tech forest. And what it is that when Steve and I and Paula Hodge from the South Central started looking at some of the courses, we realized there's just a ton of courses that we weren't quite sure how to map to some of the other subsectors we had. And we call them sort of tech related. There's all kinds of things around data analytics, there's apps, programming, cloud, mobile. I mean, I'm sure you know a lot of these courses. So we just weren't quite sure what to do with those. And we know that that needs more fleshing out. But then we created this new subsector, which is Tech Forests. BIW Office Technologies, that one's pretty straightforward. That's one that's been, for a while now, we actually have the courses and the competencies that map to that, like probably most of you know with the Excel, Word. And so there's, all those courses are done mostly on this office technology, office computer applications top code, but also there's a lot of courses that are not on that top code to map to that as well. And then digital media, we've broken out digital media and entertainment this time for the refresh that create another new subsector for entertainment. And there's some overlap for sure between the two. But for digital media, we have some top codes that are pretty good for digital media. And then we've got some courses that are mapped to probably incorrect top codes. And really they should have been mapped to a digital media top code that are in there. And then entertainment, our courses on entertainment top codes, and many of these top codes are not really mapped to the ICT DM sector. Some of them are not CTE. There's things like applied design, technical theater. Actually, technical theater is a CTE top code, but it's not mapped to any sector, okay? And I'm so sorry, but sometimes it's not, oh, there we go. Okay. So that's the supply side in terms of how many students are we getting in, have to count up and say are in these subsectors, so that then we can look at each subsector separately. And how do we do the demand for those subsectors to kind of look at and match in terms of what are the skills required and the jobs required for those subsectors. And the way we did it this time was, which I was so happy to have come upon this, is that there's a federal classification by the U.S. Department of Labor for career clusters. And if any of you are involved in guided pathways, I'm sure that you're very familiar with this work. So there's 16 national career clusters. And I don't know why I'm so sorry. There we go. Then those career pathways are then mapped to, the career clusters, 16 career clusters are then mapped to career pathways. So I didn't do any of this mapping. It's all at the federal level. And so we took the 16 clusters and then of those chose 10 that we thought mapped pretty closely, especially when you look at the pathways that were mapped to those clusters. And so from those 16 career clusters, there's 24 national career pathways that are then mapped to. And from those pathways, then we map to SOC codes that are already there in this national mapping. So you start with the career clusters, you go up to the pathways, and then now we're down to the actual occupations that map to those pathways. And then we get to our SOC codes, right? Our standard occupational codes that then we can use to pull annual openings on. And so you can see though, like for instance, business information management, that only had like one SOC code mapped to that pathway. And that's kind of how these SOC codes are. Some SOC codes are really broad and they have many, many different job titles. They encompass many skill sets. Others are more narrow. And so you'll see some of these pathways. I did another example of network systems that map to 5 SOC codes. You can see there, those are potentially have like some skill overlap for sure. Visual arts maps to many, many different SOC codes. That to me has a broad breadth of skills and competencies. And then from those SOC codes and those pathways, then we map those to each subsector. And sometimes there's overlap, right? So in our 6 ICT DM subsectors, there's 7 SOC codes out of this mapping that came from the pathways that map to IT networking. And they're pretty specific to IT networking. Those 7 SOC codes are in other places. Computer science has 9 SOC codes mapped to it. Tech Forest has 17. There's some that cross over with computer science. That makes perfect sense, right? There's this sort of blurriness between the two. BIW has the most SOC codes mapped to it, 54, and that's because it's got a ton of jobs out there that require those kind of skills and there's a big range of them in terms of the jobs. There's some lower kind of level jobs that that are more data entry or computer application. Then there's higher ones that need other competencies also along with just BIW, right? And then digital media occupations, there's 12 SOC codes for those. Entertainment has more. And of course, there's overlap with some of those SOC codes with digital media. And I just made a note down here to make sure that everybody knows like how this isn't completely perfect. We're not forcing a SOC code to be to one sector. And the idea that we really do want SOC codes because those annual openings give us the best idea of demand. We can still do searches on online postings and get postings, but we just don't know quite how those translate to actual jobs.
Once again, the acronym SOC code, what's SOC stand for?
So that's a standard occupational code, is a Bureau of Labor Statistics national code for jobs. It has just been updated in 2018 with new codes. There's not data on the new codes yet, and that particularly affected your sector, as you can imagine, because the last time these codes were updated was in 2010. A lot has happened in the job market between 2010 and 18. And they get a lot of, so what happens is they release the codes. There's a big, huge time when the public weighs in on the code classification. 2018 is nailed down. We know what the codes are, but again, the data is not trickling through on them yet. It should be coming, I think, probably this year or next year. We'll start seeing it in EMSI, which is our best source for pulling out data. It's a company in Idaho, actually, that Economic Modeling Specialists International, that we use, that has like over 100 public-private data sources, that has a complex algorithms to try to back into openings and jobs, getting down to the industry level, and then getting down to the occupation level and the SOC code level, the 6-digit SOC code level. Because just like top codes, it's another hierarchy of classification. We can go 2, we can go 4, we can go 6, we can even go 8 down to SOC code, but there's no labor market data at 8 digits. So we tend to stay at that 6-digit level. Is there another question? I see a
EMSI.
Yeah, so that's Economic Modeling Specialists International. They're a really excellent resource. They're now owned by, I'm blanking on, well, they did partner with Career Builders, but now they're owned by somebody else. That's like a think tank out of MIT, I believe. But they're probably what most everybody, I would say, and probably now starting to be the world. They've really branched out outside the United States, is using to try to determine, as one of their points, right, to try to determine demand, especially in education, workforce development. People use the data all the time. States use it to try to do planning. It's a paid for subscription that we have a subscription to be able to pull the data. And so now I'm just going to quickly kind of go through to show you what the SOC codes are, and then show you how these annual openings, and we always do an average annual opening, and we either do over a 3-year period or a 5-year period. Right now, the best data we have is 2018. I know we're in March in 2019, but the data sets are trickling in from the government and other resources to nail down to—
These are California specific?
Yes, so these are annual openings in California. Thank you. Yes, I should have that on there. Yes, yes. And then when you get this for your region, of course, your regions have been defined, by the Chancellor's Office, right, in terms of what counties are mapped, Chancellor's Office and Centers of Excellence. And so then you would see these annual openings for your regions, for the sector, the regional directors out there. And again, so this is an average annual 5-year opening for each of these occupations. And again, remember that these are not single occupations. If you want to know more about a 6-digit SOC code or 8-digit SOC code, ONET is a great resource. I think a lot of people know that. It's free from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It can tell you all kinds of things about the competencies these occupations require, the common job titles. It's a ton of information. And so that's IT networking. And then for CS occupations, all 9 SOC codes overlap with tech forests, because the tech forest is just something we're still going to try to have to parse out and do some work on. And a lot of these do say that they require a 4-year. However, this delineation that you have to have a 4-year for some of these occupations, when you look at the data of people actually employed in some of these occupations, 25 years or older, many people do not have 4-year degrees.
Yeah, and I've noticed that's especially true from my background in enterprise, that in the sales professions where people make a lot of money, having a little bit of knowledge and being able to sell is a good skill set.
Right. So particularly those sales ones, particularly there's that weird computer occupations, all other. That has many different occupations in it. Some of those have been pulled out with those new 2018 SOC codes you'll see. But that is a very much of a hodgepodge, and there's actually pretty large annual openings, as you can tell, right? I'm ranking these that are important. So that's always been a hard one for your sector, is that all other. There's a plethora of interesting, in fact, video game designers is in this computer occupations all other right now. So that's a hard one. And then, as you can tell, those software developers, application system software, those two are going to become one, I think, in 2018. Well, no, I've seen it. But you can see those are always really high, and those are just tons of different occupations under there, tons of job titles under there. So Tech Forest, those are the 9. And then you'll see there's a few new that come in here that overlap with BIW. I've got some about financial managers. So again, by ranking by annual openings, it shows you the top. I think it's about 9 is what I was able to fit on here comfortably. You'll see there's some that come in here for administrative service managers. That's a crazy top code that actually has a lot of different job titles in that one. And some more sales. And then digital media, those probably look pretty familiar. We've been pretty consistent about those SOC codes. There's 3 of these overlap with entertainment. We know that there's always been a bit of an issue for digital media where there's a lot of work being done in the gig economy, people doing things with private contracts. So we've always known the demand for this is a little bit hard. This does include self-employed people in these numbers, but we always know it's a little bit undercounted with some of these openings, I would say. Just to give you an idea, when people push back though about like our students and how many actually end up being self-employed, the only way we know CTOS outcome survey, and for across the board, all top codes, all programs, is about 10%. And then when you start getting the digital media, it doubles to about 20. So that's just from self-reported data from students who completed our program in certain program areas. So we still know that we capture a lot of our students, but again, we know that this is one area where we might not get some of the self-employed. And then entertainment, that's a different top SOC codes. Again, this is that new sector. There are quite a number of them. Since this is kind of a little bit of a traditional sector, those SOC codes, just like construction, those SOC codes have been around for a while. I think they kind of change sometime over time. Some of these, when 2018 happens, I noticed some of these producers, directors, there's a lot of those occupations now. They used to be more of your traditional producer, director, are more people making videos for online things. And so that the definition of the actual code has been updated.
I'd like to add that for a lot of these professions that we think of in their kind of traditional role, there's a lot of software applications that they now use as part of their everyday work. There's a lot of, the sets are now quiet because the cameras aren't humming anymore because they're all electronic. Dailies are no longer a film canister, they're a file, and someone has to be a file wrangler for the day's production. The whole thing's been completely networked. So
Yep.
We have to kind of ask ourselves, are we thinking entertainment 20 years ago, or are you thinking entertainment today?
Well, and I do believe that some of these producers, directors, occupations that should be here are probably somewhere else, like in a IT or computer science or something SOC code, right? This is where it gets a little bit messy. Because what happens is, so every company is classified in an industry sector, and it's where the majority of their sales are. And that's a classification, that's another classification. Then in terms of where they classify workers into occupations, that's a bit of a spidering issue in terms of how you're going to lay out, like how many CEOs, how many secretaries, how many, right? And so it's not as nice and neat, I would say. So we know there's blurring here happening. right? So like, just like you said, especially for these occupations of where there's more and more tech skills being asked for. Okay.
You did skip over the business information worker.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Uh,
Yeah, and
but
those, and then you can see, if you remember some of the openings we had like 18,000 for that one software developer category. You can see we have 48,000 still for office clerks general, right? And this one is just this huge category and of potential occupations with office work. And so once again, I think if people have been familiar with your sector for a while, this is just continually tends to be where we just still see a lot of openings, job openings. And these aren't ones, and again, what job an office clerk does can vary quite a lot. You'll even find that people employed in this SOC code, 25 and older, they can have a whole array of degrees they've earned, masters, bachelors, right? So it's a big category. And of course, there would be a lot of blurring here between office clerks or secretaries and admin assistants, right? You can tell. And again, this is the one that has 54 SOC codes and with the 8 that overlapped with Tech Forest. And this, just like entertainment, a lot of these have required a lot of tech skills. Okay, so then now we're going to get to the portion where we're starting to compare for subsectors the demand or the annual openings and supply. And so I just wanted to take one subsector and just show you, before I show you all the subsectors, and we take a moment to look at that, how it breaks out for just IT networking. So this was one that we consider behind the screen. And you can see what we've got for statewide demand is we've got our average annual openings for those 7 SOC codes that were all from that mapping from the career pathways. And we've got, 25,000 openings. And now, so this is a little bit confusing because it's all down here in the notes, but this is a 5-year annual openings, right? We wouldn't want to do past annual openings. So this is for the supply, the 16-19. So here's what our previous analysis we did is we've got average annual enrollments for 2013-16, and then we've got average annual enrollments for 2016-19. So we basically are looking at all the courses in the system, map them to IT networking. We're looking 6 years and we're saying, okay, what were these first 3 years, 13-16 average annual openings for these courses, and then 16-19, some of those courses fall off, new courses are added on, and then some courses stay through, right? And you just sit there and say, okay, this is what the numbers are comparing between 18,000, and you can see there's been a slight decline to 17,800 in terms of average annual enrollments. However, what's interesting is when you look at the number of courses offered with enrollments. So we only took the count of courses with enrollments. There's a lot of courses that are left on the books, even for a 3-year time period, that are still in, I would say, the curriculum inventory, but they just have no enrollments on them, right? So they have not been offered, basically. And so we didn't take those, but you can see how there's been a decline in enrollments, but there's been more courses offered. And it could be what's happening is that, in fact, I saw this in the data, and when you get back your regional data as regional directors, you'll see that if courses are being added, obviously, in like say, if 17, 18, 18, 19, and we get that data, there's going to be low, the average annual openings of that 3-year period, because it hasn't been offered for 3 years, will be low. So I think that's kind of driving down the total enrollments because you've been increasing classes and class offerings. However, the enrollments haven't quite matched it yet. So when you get back your data, you can kind of look and see like what's going on here. And so then the only thing we can do to back into what we need is really an unduplicated count of students. So a student who's enrolled on 3 courses, right, that would be mapped to this sector are going to show up 3 times as an enrollment. So how do we deduplicate that to bring it down to, okay, well, we need a count of students to then map to these 25,000 openings, right, average annual openings. So we took the estimated headcount based on the ratio of enrollments to students for CS, because in CS, we know how many students there are because that's one top code, and we can get unduplicated counts of students at the top code level. So for CS, it's about 54%. So we said, let's take total enrollments, multiply it by 54%, right? And that gives our head count. So that's like that 9,700 and 13-16 time period, 9,500, right, in the 16-19 time period. And then we said, well, of course, some of those students aren't going to go out to the workforce. You know, what's our persistence rate? So kind of overall, persistence rates in terms of what students are going to stay year to year. So they're going to keep studying. It's about 30%. So we took those students out of the equation, right? And if for those of you that saw this when we were together in Sacramento, I had actually an error in here, so you're going to see the numbers look different. So what we want to do then is take out those 2,000 students, and then what you're left with then is you've actually got an opportunity of 18,000. So basically you're taking the statewide demand and you're only taking 70%, right, of the students that would be working in the workforce, going to the workforce, subtracting that from demand and saying, okay, this is my opportunity. Okay.
So a couple points here that I wanted to make. The statewide demand, by the way, for those of you who think it might be low because of everything you've heard about cybersecurity, when you look at this next to the computer science and the tech forest, you'll see the numbers go up because there's a lot of blending and overlap. But this is, so some people may look at that number and say, gee, I thought it was more like 60,000. But you'll see that reconstituted when we put the three columns together. Yeah, I think the head count of students is something that I scratched my head at, and Karen did a great job of coming up with basically a factor to do that. And if these numbers are 80% accurate, that's our goal. And because the point here is to get to that strategy line down there is when we could develop programs for the community college system or recommend programs or try to apply resources or go for strong workforce funds, what's our strategy here? Well, it's to retain students and to build new students. And you'll find that's not the same strategy for every subsector. It changes. But in this particular one, that would be the strategy.
Okay, so let's see how this looks for all of the subsectors. And so what we did this time was now we added up, like Steve said, we added up the three subsectors, which is IT networking, computer science, tech forest, to call that behind the screen. So you could really see that's about 30% of the annual openings for those occupations that have been mapped to the sector, right? And about 33% of the opportunity, right? And then we did the same thing here for in front of the screen. We're seeing that 71%. And there's a little bit over counting because we've got some overlap in some of the SOC codes. So it's a little bit, I backed out some, but it's like Steve says, like you can tell, it's a little bit of a, this is not like an exact science, right? This is more of an art of how to do this. But so what we see is like 70% of the openings actually, and a lot of it you can see is because of BIW, is the business software applications annual openings. And part of that's just because there's so many occupations for that national mapping of career pathways that goes to these occupations just have really high openings. And so you can see that that's, you know, that's just where we've got 60% right here alone in terms of the openings. And then what's kind of interesting, Steve and I were talking about the other day, is that, you know, there's not a huge difference in terms of the annual openings and the offerings. There's some here and there, but it's a little bit equilibrated. So your opportunity is pretty close to what your annual openings are, which is kind of interesting. And so just like I did for, you know, so here's where you can see the IT networking cybersecurity that we just looked at. And what we added though is we added percents, right, to be able to comparisons, because I just a firm believer, especially because I do dashboard development, that unless you look at trends, unless you compare, you really don't know how you're doing. Is this good? Is this bad? And so that's just always what we're trying to help with anything is, you know, should you compare it to another region? If you're a region, should two colleges be compared to each other? Should two sectors be comparing to each other? But so that's why we did this with the subsectors, kind of comparing the subsectors, right? To just say, okay, not only does it drive your strategy, but just starts you just thinking about questions to ask. And as Steve said, this probably raises more questions that it potentially answers, but it's a start of a map. And then just down here, a lot of important caveats at the very bottom that I include, just to be really clear, once you get your data back, that you can see exactly what's been mapped. There's an actual methodology behind these numbers that's really pretty clear cut and pretty consistent across the whole statewide offerings of courses. As you saw, the demand comes from basically a national mapping, and then the clear pathway mapping to your subsector. So while it's a little bit of, it still has a methodology that can be explained behind it for when anybody asks the centers of excellence or colleges. There's a clear methodology that's nice to be able to say down here, this is what we did. And that's kind of what this PowerPoint is for, is just to make sure that you have the resources you need to be able to understand, what you're really looking at.
I think recently, and Allison's on the call, recently we did a discussion on one of our webinars about transfer of best practices in computer science. And in that webinar, I believe we had the figure for how many students transfer. Is that this number here that we see, the head count on the computer science? Do we have 7,900 students transfer annually?
No, no. So that's the problem, is that we can look on dashboards to get your number who transferred. So what happens is we can look to see of students that took courses on top codes mapped to your sector.
Mm-hmm.
And say we look and we say make sure the student exits the system for a year. Then we look to see if we find them in a UC CSU match on that more is on student ID, and then the National Student Center Clearinghouse on Social Security. If we find them, then we know they transferred. The problem you've got again is that 0706 top code that's not a CT top code, that's not mapped to your sector, because remember, industry sectors are only created for really CT top codes. There's one exception, education. You've got a little bit of a problem when you see transfer and any resource that will show you transfer for your sector. So you've got to always add in your top code that is this computer science subsector right here.
I recall that we did have a number for the number of students that transfer in computer science. I just couldn't recall.
What we've got is from the CSU and UC data. We know how many students coming from each college go into SIP codes that would be considered, remember we've mapped out which ones you would consider CS transfer, because there's several SIP codes. So again, that's the equivalent of top in the CSU UC system. But what we don't know, and we won't know, is statewide longitudinal data system. We don't know what do those students do in our system, right? So we see in our system, these students on these top codes transferred, right? We don't know where they transferred to. We don't know what they transferred into. Right? We can't connect that yet to say, okay, we know in UCCSU, these students out of these colleges transferred into CS, but we don't know what they were taking.
Okay, yeah, and I think just for a rough approximation, Allison just chimed in that the number that you guys developed together was about 4,000 students transferring into computer science, who knows where from in the CCCs. But I just wanted to compare that to the opportunity number, which is 54,000. So that implies that we have an opportunity to push another 50,000 students through computer science as an opportunity. And, and there's plenty of jobs out there for them. So if anybody's wondering if they should pour the gas on their computer science transfer, the answer is yes. And
you can't see, Steve, well, it's probably kind of low enrollment. And this is what's a little bit tricky, as we know there's some computer science pathways happening that aren't on that 0706 top code. And that's what we're missing here. So you can see these counts are pretty low. Again, remember, this is just that one top code, but it has had a huge jump. This is like probably the biggest jump, right? In tech forests. You can see there's a lot of stuff happening in tech, but percentage wise, this is like low number compared to tech forest, but a considerable jump. And so what's happening is there's some stuff in tech forests that is part of, right, it's not on the right top code, and we decided, like, let's not try, we can't disentangle this. That would just be really hard. You'd have to go, this is where the regional directors in my mind will come in, and I think that you might know by looking at the courses at the colleges, you'll know that is really part of a CS transfer pathway that's just not coded to CS.
You're right. This high level and the drill down by region is going to be the next important step. Just one other thing we commonly observe when we look at this that you and I have talked about is you look at the business information worker or the business software applications columns, and you compare that to digital media. And I think one of the observations we have is, well, gee, if all the jobs are in business information worker, why is everybody taking all that digital media? And we know the answer. It's fun. They like it. It's exciting. But the challenge that it puts to us is we don't want to discourage anyone from taking digital media. but we want to figure out how we can blend those a little bit
Yeah.
more. So what I love about this information is that it puts those programmatic challenges in front of us. It says, okay, here's this huge opportunity, and here's your enrollment for business type things, and here's this other situation in digital media. What can you, educational expert professional, come up with that's going to help rectify this a little bit? So that's our challenge.
Yeah, and it'll be a big challenge when the K-12 SWP and a lot of emphasis on the K-14 pathways. The K-12 have so much digital media, and try to help them understand how to make that, just like you say, crossover more with the BIW competencies as well. Well, many people have come to that conclusion, that's if you look at like what's actually being offered right now in terms of CT courses at high schools. And like you say, a lot of students, like my daughter's in graphic design right now, learning Illustrator, and she loves it, right? But it's trying to make a little, like, let's expand out those competencies a little bit more. And that will happen on the K-12 SWP that is trying to focus on those pathways. I bet there's going to be a lot of focus around that.
Well, I mean, I'm falling victim to what I normally do whenever I talk to you, Karen, is I start getting into the details and just loving this stuff. So I'm going to let you go ahead and
Okay.
fly.
If there's no more questions on this, then I will move on. Okay. Okay, so then, so this was a very specific analysis, right, for your sector that we did at the course level. Again, like we justified up front of why we need to do this. Biggest, largest, really skills-based, not really an industry sector. Construction's an industry sector, health is an industry sector, but this kind of idea of horizontal jobs here, vertical here, or skill sets. You have the skill sets or jobs here, vertical sectors here. If you do that, like, the skill sets for ICT DM are everywhere, right? They're across all sectors. So that's why we try to do this. However, especially for me, that my job, most of my job is developing dashboards for the system to be able to look at how students are doing. And the dashboard that's most relevant, because we are at the sector level, which means that you have to be at the top code level. Because to make a sector in our system, then that means we take top codes and say this is a sector, right? Of this top codes or programs is a sector. So the only dashboard right now that's been updated, it doesn't have 18-19 data yet, but it will. But to align with definitions that are in the student-centered funding formula and the student success metrics and the vision goal metrics and our system-wide metrics is the strong workforce program dashboard. So you can drill down to your sector by just selecting information communication technology. And this is one of the metrics. There's only a handful of metrics out there. You just Google CalPAS Plus or Google Launchboard. These have been made available to the public now. And this is where you can get information in terms of what metrics are being used, like to calculate student-centered funding formula, right? So all this would be going into those calculations of supplemental funding for the student-centered funding formula. There's a couple caveats where the Chancellor's Office said, no, we do not want to align to student-centered funding formula. So if you want to become very savvy in this, just take some time to read the notes. Also, these are the exact metrics that are used in the 17% SWP allocation. So that was our first funding formula in the system, was CTE based. We just released round 4. I think just last week or the week before. So, and that the people in the regions are very much interested there's a little bit of basically all the data for that is in this dashboard. So if you want to look to see, okay, well, how is my program doing for these metrics? How's my sector doing? How are the colleges doing? As you can see, you've got drill down by sector, drill down by top code. You can drill down by region, macro, micro. You can look at a college district level or a college level. And there's different ways to slice the data. We always want to make sure that you can get to the gender, race, age group, and economic disadvantage, because for the student-centered funding formula, as well as the 17% SWP, economically disadvantaged students get more points, basically, right? They get more funding. And so you want to know how outcomes look between non-economically disadvantaged students and economically disadvantaged students. And if you ever want to get really in the details, little by little, then what my main job is keeping up this metric definition dictionary that will give you the description of what you're actually looking at right? To a very detailed level. This is done so that researchers can recreate their data, the coders can code the dashboard, but as a level of detail as technical assistance providers to the system, I hope when you're interested in learning something and you have time to delve into it, you start becoming really familiar, because now in our system, we have a subset of metrics that are being used across initiatives that are defined in the same way to measure our system. And that's new this year.
And I think the reason we wanted to insert this slide and share it with everybody is you just looked at the macro analysis of, say, the ICT sector. It could be done on any sector. And from that, there's been certain strategies that are implied that would be good for student growth and student opportunity and that sort of thing. So that we need to tie that into how you get metric type credit for what you're doing. And in my discussion with Karen, we decided that the 9+ earned 9+ CTE units was probably one of the most effective metrics that you can look at in terms of something you can change, promote, add to, or increase on the short term. So as you look at those growth opportunities in the sectors or recombinations or whatever, and you decide to do some marketing, or you decide to do some enhancement or whatever, if you can zero in on where you've already got some success in the 9+ CTE units and choose that as a low-hanging fruit type opportunity, and then apply more persuasiveness to that. And nowadays it looks like it probably needs to be offered online as well. But so this is the tool that helps you finally connect the big picture to what you can actually do about it.
And I just want to add that I'd be more than happy. You have my email address to do any kind of professional development for anybody. What's just happened is that the Chancellor's Office released, this dashboard was released end of November. No communication has gone out yet. I finally was able to post an FAQ, or it will be posted. It's been just really hard to make sure that people know this dashboard has been updated. It is aligned with the funding formula. So if there's any kind of professional development, your region, your sector, anybody would want a private, please let me know. Because I feel, I like tell Steve all the time when we're at executive ops with the WED team, is that I feel like these dashboards should really help your sector be able to do its job. This is data that's at a very high level. We know that. We know it's not the end all, but I'm really hoping that as part of your job, you'll see that you can become, this will help you do your job better, I think. So anything I can do to support that.
All right, I believe we added some slides, and I don't know, Karen, if you could help me toggle through them. I don't have.
I'm trying. I don't know why I think my keyboard like gets like frozen when I don't use it or something, because it starts not like responding. I've never had this happen before. Let me just, I'm going to escape for one moment. Oh no, see, it's like frozen. I don't know what's going on. Maybe I'll stop sharing for a second, and let me try sharing again and see if that like unfreezes. No, it doesn't. Sorry, I don't know. I don't quite know what. Oh, no, Nicole, could you share maybe for the rest of the slides? I've got one more that's the now what. But for some reason, my, it's just kind of frozen. That's happened like 3 times now. And who knows, I think everybody's at home working too. And I think like the bandwidth is, I don't think it's my household. I'm thinking it's the community.
Oh, I heard Netflix has been told to slow it down because.
So let's see, I'm not, because the rest of me, let me escape out of that. Let's see, maybe I can try one more time. Yeah, let's just try. So I'll go here to this slide and start the share again. There we go. Oh, no, it didn't do it. See, oh, there we go. Now it's back. So I'm so sorry. I'm not sure what's going on with that. I'm not a super seasoned webinar person. And so just really quickly, the now what, and we talked about this, a lot of this already, but by the end of the month, I am going to provide the regional breakdowns, including courses and course IDs by college for all your sectors, all your regions by subsector. We know we need further exploration of tech forest. That might be another iteration at a later date. Again, other sources of data for college engagement, your disposal. around the launch board, the SWP dashboard that we just looked at, that was released the end of November, aligned to student success centered funding formula. We are working very hard to get the community college pipeline up. That has just so many metrics. When you start going into SWP and seeing those few metrics that are outcome metrics, you'll have a ton more questions, and a lot of those questions can be answered in the community college pipeline. It is at the top code level, sector level, but we are still rebuilding it to align again to like student success metrics, student-centered funding formula, and that will hopefully will happen in May, or potentially end of April. And again, like Steve talked about, identify opportunities for promoting student attainment of 9+ CT units, and the other outcome metrics align with funding formulas, which a lot of it's completion, transfer to 4-year, and then attaining the living wage, right? So those are very now limited number of metrics.
Well, if you can keep toggling, I'll go through this very quickly. This was just a little tag-on type, a few slides that I wanted to share. Once you've looked at the macroeconomics and you understand the launch board technique to find what you might want to promote and what's coming up next, there's some resources that we've already developed that can help colleges expand the number of enrollments and completions and that sort of thing. We've done a lot of work. We look for each of those subsectors. We look through all the different stages of the pathways for each of the subsectors and ask what kind of tools and supports might be necessary. And on the next slide, you can see that's a pretty complicated process. We did this. We spent a lot of money and a lot of time, a couple of years, looking at all the best practices on each stage of the pathways for each of the subsectors. And on the next slide, what it shows you is that once you've got the metrics and you've identified the stages, you still have to do a whole lot of research work. We call it businesses, do industry engagement, do surveys online, Google surveys, go to conferences, gather information, hire investigators to look at different aspects. And then we take all that information and we share it. And on the next slide, just to remind you, we do have a website. Everything that we've done is recorded there. All the archives, all the do-it-yourself toolkits, webinars, everything is there. For example, on the next slide, here's all the resources we have for in front of the screen. Student success, everything we've done on business information worker, webinars, do-it-yourself kits, cohort management models, digital media and entertainment, a lot of wonderful things. And then on the next slide, you can see what we've got for behind this screen, and including our most recent webinar on computer science transfer best practices. And so we keep a lot of this going. On the next slide, this is the way we keep it going. Our best software that we have, or program we have, are 10 people named RDEEs and their support. So working with Karen, our team has been looking at this data for some time. There's a lot of nuances to the data, and it's complicated. Colleges, I think, tend to get used to doing things their own departmental way. And we need to, every now and then, kind of explode the premise, look at the data, look at different options and share them. And that's what we're here for as a team. So with that, my comments are done. I think it's good now to turn it back to Karen or anybody else for final comments. And then when you, okay.
I'm just looking at the comments, yeah.
When you say in front, behind the screen, what does the metaphor mean? Well, the screen is the screen on your computer. And so behind the screen is everything that makes what happened on that screen happen. The programming, the networking, the everything else. And in front of the screen is the user sitting there looking at the screen like me right now, trying to figure out what button to push to make a slide go forward, you know. But so that's all it means. It's actually a very literal analogy. I guess I didn't explain it too well.
Well, I think it was like just one way to just sort of segment things, right? This is like continually, we're finding ways to try to organize and segment in a very complex sector is always how, and when I saw this from Steve, I just thought this was a great way to try an organization. And yeah, there's no login to CalPass. I guess you understood that. Yep, just Google Launchboard or CalPass Plus. There's only one dashboard that's still protected, I think, which is a K-14 transition one, but that will morph to a K-12 SWP that will be the metrics for that funding source. And all those dashboards on Launchboard they basically map to statewide initiatives is what they are. And they always are like, so they tend to be different universe of students. Okay, so for instance, SWP dashboard we look is only CTE top codes because that's only CTE strong workforce program. So just know that as you start working amongst the dashboards.
I see some of the questions are we going to have this up? And yes, our normal procedure for this webinar is to have the recording up on our website within about a week, which includes a transcription. And we'll have the PowerPoint slides as well. And then what I'm hoping is that as Karen completes the regional, we'll be able to post the regional data on at that same location as well. So anybody who watches this thing can then go on our website and get the regional data. And we hope this will encourage discussions with our regional directors and hopefully positive new ideas on ways to do things. That's the whole idea behind it. But that pretty much wraps up our time for today. So unless or something that just got to ask, which I don't see anything else in the chat box here. I just want to thank you all for joining us today. And next week we'll be back with humanizing online learning or distance learning or something good about learning. All right. See you then. Take care.